Welcome, everybody, to Krystal, Kyle, and Friends. Today, we're going to be talking to a man by the name of Dayen. And
one of the greats.
I like him. I don't know how many in our audience are familiar with him because, some people are more just, I want to watch the stuff I consume about news. Others are more, let me read about it. But he has this outlet called the American Prospect, and they do a phenomenal job. So I'm really happy to have him on. He's been a guy who I've followed for a long time. Just to let everybody know, the thing I know him most for, and you could chime in with what you know him most for, but he's the guy who set up the Biden executive order tracker at the beginning of his presidency.
Yeah.
And was like, here are the things he can do. Here are the things that, at least to this point, that he has and hasn't done. And he tracks it, and it's very vital and crucial information. And he's as big of a policy wonk as you can get.
I think that type of work is so incredibly essential because it's one thing for us to sit here and say, like, they should do more. But he's saying, here are concrete things they could be doing and are choosing not to, and goes way beyond, the obvious things like descheduling marijuana and student loan debt relief, like a whole mass of executive orders they could be doing and are not. And they can really, the whole outlet can be counted on to dive into the details of policy in a way that is profoundly helpful and important for having a functioning democracy.
You know what I learned from him? There's a bunch of things I learned from him, but one of the things I learned from him is that the president basically already has the authority to give everybody health care.
Right.
He's the one who found the legal backing for that idea. Now, I forget, and I'll ask him this question because I'm curious what the answer is, because I feel like there was one time I read it's a provision of Obamacare.
That's right.
No, but then there was another time I read it's actually a provision of the Social Security Act that allows you to say, in times of emergency, expand Medicare, Medicaid to everybody.
Well, I know there's an Obamacare connection because there's a town.
The Montana town, yeah.
In
Libby, Montana?
Yes.
Do I have that right?
Where everybody was given Medicare because of, like, they were all poisoned by industrial runoff or something like that. And so that was a key ask for that senator at the time in order to sign on to Obamacare. They were like, we need this thing for Libby.
That guy was against Medicare for all for everybody, too, though.
Right.
Such a douchebag move.
Classic.
For my town, yes, but for your town, fuck off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Classic.
Another thing I learned from him, we don't need to get into all this, but one more thing I learned from him is the president has the authority already on his own to lower prescription drug prices. So all this talk and debate and, like, should we put it in the bill? Should we not put it in the bill? That's nonsense. Biden has the authority to already do that. And it was Dayen who taught me that.
Great. Well, we really actually lucked out to get him, and then we'll transition into some of the things we wanted to talk about, because he also is someone who is really diving into the details of this new big surprise deal that came out of nowhere between Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer that has significant corporate tax increases, that also has some significant climate investment. And just to give you guys a little bit of the backstory here, I mean, we all thought that anything approaching Build Back Better was dead.
That's still true. That's still true.
Yes, but the big thing they were debating was, like, maybe we'll do some ACA subsidies. Maybe we'll do this prescription drug pricing reform that we've literally been running on for over a decade. That was the most that they were hoping for. And then out of nowhere, I mean, this really came as a shock to political observers, every journalist, and reportedly to the White House themselves, who were not involved in negotiating this deal.
Biden's so useless.
It's totally, I mean,
he's over there.
Yeah, it is a real statement on
Joe, I'll give you whatever you want. Oh, good.
Yeah, it is a statement on, like, how inconsequential and irrelevant Biden is, that they felt like we're just going to exempt, you are going to be just as surprised as anybody else. So,
and he immediately signed on to it too. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, before he's like, sure,
I'm with this. Yeah,
that's great.
Totally.
I was totally involved in this.
Silly. He's so useless.
So anyway, long thought that this was all completely dead, and lo and behold, they have some kind of a deal. So let me tell you what the details are here. And part of what is making people a little more hopeful, although there are still some obstacles that we'll get into, that this might actually happen, is that this came directly from Joe Manchin. So it wasn't like Schumer saying, here's what we want, and we're going to take it to Joe, and maybe he'll like it, and whatever. This actually came directly from him. Okay. So according to Jeff Stein, I'm reading his tweet now. Tax policies in this deal, it's 15% corporate minimum tax. So, and that applies to, I think, corporations who make over $1 billion. So for large corporations, you're not going to pay less than 15% minimum tax. This is an idea that came from Elizabeth Warren.
Do they say how much revenue it raises or no?
$313 billion.
Okay, so that's real.
Significant.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's like no more of this
not pennies.
0%, no more of this, negative tax rate where you get a subsidy, or 0%, like GE paid 0% a number of years.
Yes.
Honeywell, same thing.
We're not going to let you just exploit and abuse the tax code so that you pay absolutely nothing. We're going to have at least this 15% corporate minimum tax. As with all these things, devil's in the details, making sure that actually works out. But that's the idea, and they say it would raise $313 billion. Prescription drug reform, which we've been talking about, something Democrats have been running on for a decade and somehow seem to never get done, where they'd be able to...
that I'm worried about.
Why is that?
Because I feel like they're going to find a way to... Remember when they
water it down,
Yeah, when they were negotiating this originally, and they went from like, we're going to negotiate for lower prescription drug prices, and then it became like, we'll do like 7 drugs, and we'll do it by like 2027.
Yeah, they did do that. So the drug makers were like, you can negotiate on these ones, but not the ones that we actually care about.
So when we get specifics, I'm very curious. I feel like there will be many devils in those details. You know what I'm saying?
They say that one will raise $288 billion. Increased IRS tax enforcement to raise $124 billion. That one also, it matters the details. I mean, what's really disgusting with IRS tax enforcement currently is that they go aggressively after like the poorest Americans. And then if you're rich and you're a tax cheat, you are very unlikely to be audited. You're much more likely to be audited if you're like a poor working class person than if you're a rich person.
Do they stipulate that it needs to be used against the top 1% or anything like that?
Don't know yet.
See, again, now I'm getting worried. Because everybody, I saw a lot of people on Twitter celebrating this deal, and I, perused over what we know so far. And I was like, yeah, on paper, it sounds good. But every single time, once we get down to the nitty gritty of it, it's like 4 lobbyists who work for GlaxoSmithKline.
Let me also say, this is why it's great to have Dayen on today.
Right,
because he is, as much as we know that exists about this deal, he knows about it. So he may have some of these answers. We'll ask him about it. They also want to close the carried interest loophole, another thing that gets talked about every year. They say that'll only raise $14 billion. We'll see. But this is just carried interest loophole. It's just a giant giveaway to private equity ghouls. That's all that is.
Right. Okay.
That one could be an issue for Kyrsten Sinema, who has previously said she's opposed to that. It could also be an issue for people like Josh Gottheimer in the House, who's like the worst possible Democrat, who's like wants the SALT tax cap thing.
I'm going to come back to my theory on that in a minute. Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
So anyway, that one might be a sticking point. On the spending side, it's $369 billion towards energy and climate change. It's what Manchin describes as an all of the above approach. So you're talking about solar, wind. You're also talking about nuclear, which I support that being in there as well. And you've got the ACA extension, $64 billion. One of Manchin's stipulations is that you needed to do some significant deficit reduction with this as well.
ACA is Obamacare, guys. So it's an Obamacare funding extension.
Right.
That is.
Not just funding extension, but they increased some of the subsidies for Obamacare to make it more affordable to more people. And that was in that first bill that passed in the Biden administration, the COVID relief bill. What do they call it? Is that the I don't remember what that one was called. CARES Act?
No, I think the CARES Act. Was the CARES Act under Trump?
I don't know. Anyway, the first one that Biden passed, that was in there. And
there were 2 Biden passed.
That's set to expire in like literally October. So we're going to have a bunch of people who right before the election were going to get notices that their healthcare premiums were jumping up significantly. So even the idiot Democrats realized this is a big political problem for them and made it a priority to get that through. So those are the broad strokes of the deal. There's a few other things just like the political context, which is interesting here, which is...
This is great, actually. I love this.
Yeah, so Democrats wanted to get this CHIPS Act through, which helps to subsidize the microchips industry.
So it's building factories here for the microchip industry.
Yes.
Which we had previously outsourced all of it because we're a bunch of fucking idiots. And
yeah, so it's all basically in Taiwan right now.
Right.
And so,
Oh, yeah, that's safe.
Great, super great. And so...
the place that's under China's boot.
There was this big effort, okay, we want to get this CHIPS Act thing done, industrial policy, and Republicans, some of them were willing to join with Democrats, but McConnell had threatened the CHIPS Act and said, if you're going to do any, what he describes as partisan reconciliation bill, the CHIPS Act is off the table.
By the way, can we reflect on that for a second?
Yeah, that's disgusting.
Think about how dark that is.
Yeah, that like...
I'm against American manufacturing if I don't get my political way.
Right.
So then you're just against American manufacturing.
Exactly. If either the law is good and you support it, or you don't. And they did something even so. Okay, so CHIPS Act passes through the Senate, and then literally hours later, the details of this bill come out. And so, if this had come out and leaked before the CHIPS thing passes, then the whole thing gets blown up. But they held their tongues long enough to get this through.
So, in other words, Chuck Schumer pulled a Mitch McConnell. Because that's some shit that Mitch McConnell would do. That's some shit that Harry Reid would have done back in the day.
Shocking actual competence and strategy.
This is Chuck Schumer saying, yeah, reconciliation's dead. We'll do the CHIPS Act. It's totally cool. Let's do that. And then right after they do that, aha, bitch, we got a reconciliation bill.
Literally hours later.
So, but now let's get to the most important part, which is what's going to happen from here. Well, first of all, let's stipulate, like we said before, the devil's in the details. And there may be too many devils in the end summation where it's not worth it. And by the way, we'll have a conversation later with Dayen on the CHIPS Act where I think it's a very nuanced and complex conversation.
Yeah.
The idea
there's some problems with the bill.
Bringing back, American manufacturing for microchips, I'm all on board for. And in fact, I celebrated when we heard, these new factories are going to be built in Michigan and Ohio and all these different places. But again, the devil's in those details as well. And Bernie Sanders is against the bill, and Bernie Sanders is a pretty intelligent guy. And so you have to wonder, well, how bad is it? But anyway, I digress from that point. What's going to happen with this reconciliation deal? So here's my theory, and I'd like to know your thoughts as well. People seem to already be accepting that it's like a foregone conclusion that it will get through the Senate. That's the tone of the conversation that I've seen on this in the political world. I'm not as confident as those people that it's a guarantee it's going to get through the Senate. I basically think you flip a coin, because if this is Manchin's deal and he's the one who's parroting it, well, then the only one you got to worry about really is Kyrsten Sinema.
Yeah.
But there is reason to worry about Kyrsten Sinema. But beyond that, so let's say for a second it does end up getting through the Senate, which again, I'm 50-50 on that. I'm agnostic. We'll see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen. But let's say it does get through the Senate. Well, then it goes to the House. What's going to happen in the House? Josh Gottheimer is one of the most corrupt Democrats.
He's terrible.
Josh Gottheimer represents nothing but Big Pharma and Wall Street and the wealthy and hedge funds. And like Alex Salmon here said on Twitter, he's a great writer for the American Prospect as well. He says Josh Gottheimer is going to be a bigger liability to this bill's passage than Kyrsten Sinema. He only needs to pull 3 of what's called the unbreakable 9 to kill this. A lot of game left to be played. So what he's talking about there is, it's not the Blue Dog Caucus. What's their name again? They have a different name that's like a...
Aren't they the New Democrat Caucus?
New Democrat
or something
Caucus?
Like that?
Something like that. Anyway, it's these corporate ghouls. There's 9 of them that are likely no's on the bill, and he only needs to grab 3 of them. So even if, in theory, if you get Manchin and you get Sinema, it's like, okay, so the most corrupt assholes in the Senate are for it, but what about the most corrupt assholes in the House? And so I think it is more likely than not right now that either the bill dies or it gets watered down to the point of being something you should vote against anyway, where they might tweak the provisions in the House and make them worse and worse and worse, and then at the end of the day, you're left with a steaming pile of dog shit.
Yeah.
And everybody pretends, it's the best we can get, but the best you can get is actually going backwards.
So Gottheimer, for those who, I'm sure you guys remember this, but he was the leader of the quote-unquote SALT caucus. That they were like, no SALT, no deal, meaning they were...
we need tax cuts for rich people in blue states.
And he represents, in fairness to him, his constituency is like people who will benefit from this and benefit from the carried interest loophole and whatever. So I guess you could say he's representing his constituents. Interesting. Manchin, in his statement on all of this, he calls out the SALT tax explicitly. And he says our tax code should not favor red state or blue state elites with loopholes.
Shut up, Jill, man. You are an elite.
Like, I know, I'm so full of shit.
Jesus
But
Christ.
anyway, he says it should not favor them with loopholes like SALT and should focus more on closing unfair loopholes like carried interest. So it almost seems like he's kind of laying down a red line of he, does not want the SALT tax thing that Gottheimer wants. So it could set up a direct conflict there.
You want to know why that is? Because the SALT tax applies in blue states.
Right. It's not good for West Virginians. His people don't benefit from it.
Right. Correct. Exactly. So he's fine with raising taxes on... He's right about it.
He's right.
But he's a total fucking fraud because this is a guy who took money from 25 Republican billionaires and every corporation under the sun.
Obviously.
And there's a million taxes on corporations and the wealthy that he draws a line at. And he's like, no, don't raise their taxes.
There's another catch with all of this, which is he Manchin, in exchange for doing this deal, is demanding more green lighting of fossil fuel projects. You'll see this referred to as permitting reform.
Yeah, but Biden's already greenlighting everything anyway, right?
But so
Yeah.
that's the other piece is the idea is after reconciliation that he'll get his fossil fuel project, quote unquote, permitting reform. Now, again, we're still learning details about the climate piece of this. The early analysis that I've seen is that the spending is sufficient, that it more than offsets what you would end up with, so that on balance, it is still a good deal, even if they push forward these new fossil fuel projects. So that's where we are.
Since we don't know the details, I find it weird when people say stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
we have to know the details first. It's like, you
Something
can't just take their PR releases as like, this is fact.
Yeah.
Like, no, what's actually in the bill? But anyway, that, I think we gave a fair summation and a fair breakdown there. And,
Yeah.
you know, we'll see what happens moving forward, and obviously we'll continue to cover it.
And I don't underestimate Kirsten Sinema as a continued fly in the ointment, because she has been very opposed to like any new taxes, not just on individuals, but corporations as well. She's opposed to closing the carried interest loophole. So she could still be an issue here too.
Of course. All right, what you just saw is a little teaser clip from Krystal, Kyle, and friends. We had a phenomenal conversation with David Dayen, who is a massive policy expert, a wonk. He knows all the ins and outs of the executive orders Biden can do and what he can't do, and he gives us the details on the reconciliation bill that's up for a vote shortly, and the CHIPS Act, which just passed the House. So this is a super substantive episode, and if you guys are interested in that, you pay $5 a month. You get the video of the interview and every Krystal, Kyle, and friends interview, and you get it a day early. And the other thing is, if you want to listen for free, it's on virtually every single podcasting app. But you should still sign up on Substack, because then as soon as the audio podcast drops, you can get it delivered directly to your email. So either pay $5 a month and get the video of Krystal, Kyle, and friends and get it Krystal, Kyle, and friends and get it a day early, or just sign up for free on Substack and then you get it a day later. So everybody check it out. We love you. Peace.